They gave me 2 hours to pack up my desk. I gave them exactly 2 hours before their $33 million launch imploded. The best part, I only used one thing to do it, the very system I built for them. 16 years of invisible work, dismissed with a restructuring email at 4 p.m. on a Wednesday. They thought I was just another replaceable cog in their machine. They forgot that some cogs hold the entire engine together. And when you remove them, everything stops turning. My name is Clara May Griffin, and for 16 years, I was the ghost in Valtricor Technologies' machine. 43 years old, divorced, no kids, and apparently, no value beyond keeping their servers running at 3 a.m. when everyone else was home sleeping. I started at Valtricor when it was just 12 people crammed into a converted warehouse in East Austin. Back then, the CEO knew everyone's coffee order, and we'd debug code while sharing takeout containers on folding tables. I built their first server rack with my own hands, ran Ethernet cables through ceiling tiles while balanced on a ladder in heels because I'd come straight from my sister's wedding. Now Valtricor occupies 3 floors of a glass tower downtown, employs over 400 people, and I doubt half of them know I exist. When they do notice me, it's only when something breaks. "Hey, Clara can fix that," they'd say, like I was a wrench in the toolbox rather than the person who designed the entire workshop. I've survived 4 CEOs, each one younger and more detached than the last. 3 major restructurings that somehow always promoted everyone except me. 2 complete system failures that only I knew how to resurrect because I'd written the recovery protocols in bash scripts nobody else could read. The latest CEO, a 32-year-old wunderkind named Bradley Chen, probably couldn't pick me out of a lineup. During his first all-hands meeting, he walked right past me to shake hands with the intern who'd been there 2 weeks. The intern got invited to the leadership lunch. I got asked to fix the conference room projector. My desk sits in what we call the dungeon, the basement level where they keep the server room and those of us too useful to fire but too unglamorous to display. No windows. Fluorescent lights that flicker just enough to give you headaches by noon. The walls are covered with network diagrams I drew by hand, passwords written on Post-its in my own coded system, and a calendar from 2009 that I never bothered to replace because what's the point? People call me Clara from IT when they need something. Not Clara, the infrastructure architect who designed the redundancy systems that kept us online during the 2021 freeze. Not Clara who wrote the custom authentication protocol that saved the company $2 million in licensing fees. Just Clara from IT, like I materialized from thin air whenever printers jammed or passwords needed resetting. I eat lunch alone at my desk, watching system logs scroll by like matrix code, while others gather in the artisanal coffee bar upstairs. I know more about this company's digital skeleton than anyone. Every vulnerability, every shortcut, every Band-Aid solution held together with deprecated code and prayer. The young developers upstairs work on flashy apps and talk about disruption. I work on the pipes that keep their disruption from drowning in its own data. They hired a new CTO last month, Evan Martinez. Fresh from Silicon Valley with a Stanford MBA and a Twitter following, he toured the office like a colonial explorer, pointing at infrastructure elements I'd built and declaring them legacy systems that needed modernization. He looked right through me when I tried to explain why certain things were configured the way they were. His assistant scheduled meetings about my systems, without me. But here's what none of them understood. I wasn't just maintaining their infrastructure. I was their infrastructure. Every critical process ran through authentication keys I'd created. Every automated task operated on cron jobs I'd scripted. Every security certificate, every backup protocol, every piece of digital duct tape holding their startup-era code to their enterprise ambitions. All of it traced back to admin accounts that IT Clara from the dungeon controlled. They thought I was invisible. They were right, but they forgot that invisible doesn't mean powerless. It just means you don't see the blow coming. Wednesday started like any other day in my dungeon. Coffee at 7:30 a.m. System checks by 8. First help desk ticket by 8:15. Someone on the 3rd floor couldn't access their email. Standard stuff. I fixed it remotely while listening to the hum of server fans, my constant companions for the better part of 2 decades. The email came at 3:47 p.m., not from HR, not from my supposed supervisor who I'd met exactly twice, but from Evan's assistant. Urgent meeting in conference room C at 4 p.m. Please be prompt. I should have known. They always schedule the executions for late afternoon, after the important meetings are done. When the witnesses have already started thinking about dinner plans, I saved my work, locked my screen, and walked to the elevator, passing cubicles full of people who wouldn't make eye contact. The smell of fresh paint in the hallway. They'd just redesigned the third floor in what they called collaborative workspace aesthetic. I wondered if they'd paint over my dungeon next, or just seal it off entirely. Conference room C was the small one, the one they used for performance reviews and other unpleasant necessities. Evan sat at the head of the table, pecking at his phone, a woman from HR, Jennifer or Jessica. I'd never bothered to learn. Sat beside him with a folder thick enough to beat someone to death with. They both looked up when I entered, wearing the particular expression of people about to do something distasteful but necessary, like putting down a family pet. "Clara, please sit," Evan said, gesturing vaguely at the chair across from them. He pronounced my name wrong, Claire instead of Claro. After 16 years, they still couldn't get that right. "I'll stand," I said. "No point in getting comfortable for this." Jennifer or Jessica opened her folder. As you know, Valtricor is entering an exciting new phase of growth and innovation. "You're firing me." I cut through the corporate euphemisms like the Ethernet cables I used to splice. "Just say it." Evan had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable. "We're restructuring the IT department to align with our new technological vision. Your position is being eliminated." My position? I almost laughed. My position was the foundation their house of cards was built on. And who's taking over my responsibilities? "We're bringing in a managed service provider," Evan said, brightening at the chance to talk strategy. "CloudForge Solutions. They're industry leaders in infrastructure modernization. We'll be migrating everything to their platform over the next quarter." CloudForge. I knew them. Slick salespeople who promised executives the moon and delivered Google Docs with a markup. They'd take one look at our jerry-rigged systems and either run screaming or quote a number that would make the CFO faint. "Effective immediately?" I asked. "We're prepared to offer you 2 hours to collect your personal belongings," HR Jennifer said, sliding a document across the table. "Security will escort you out by 6 p.m. Your access will be terminated at that time." I looked at the termination agreement. Standard severance, 2 weeks' pay for my 16 years. No mention of my name anywhere in the document. Even in firing me, I was just employee ID 1947. "There's also the matter of knowledge transfer," Evan added, trying to sound casual. "We'll need all your passwords, documentation, any notes about the systems." "It's all in the shared drive," I lied smoothly. "Everything you need." He relaxed visibly. Of course he did. Why would Clara from IT, reliable Clara, invisible Clara, ever be anything but helpful? "We appreciate your years of service," Jennifer or Jessica said, delivering the line like she was reading ingredients off a cereal box. "Please understand this isn't personal. It's simply business evolution." I signed the papers without reading them. What was the point? They'd already decided I was obsolete, a legacy system to be modernized out of existence. They sat there, waiting for me to leave, to cry, to beg, to do something that would make them feel either justified or guilty. Instead, I smiled. 2 hours, you said? "Yes," Jennifer confirmed. "Security will meet you at your desk." I left them sitting there, probably already congratulating themselves on how smoothly it had gone. No scenes, no drama, just another seamless restructuring. Back in my dungeon, a security guard I'd never seen before stood awkwardly by my desk, trying not to look at the personal items that made up my life here. A coffee mug that said, "World's Okayest Sister." A photo from the company picnic in 2012, back when we still had company picnics. A stress ball shaped like a server that one of the old developers had given me as a joke. 2 hours. They gave me 2 hours to pack up 16 years. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out an old laptop. My personal one that I'd used for testing. They'd never asked me to return it. Probably never knew I had it. Why would they? It was just another invisible tool used by their invisible infrastructure architect. As I packed my few belongings into a cardboard box, I thought about all the things they didn't know. The back doors I'd left myself for emergency access. the admin accounts created before they'd implemented proper security policies, the cron jobs running on my personal credentials because it was easier than filing a ticket with myself. 2 hours. I wondered if they'd picked that number specifically, or if it was just standard HR protocol. Either way, it was about to become the most expensive 2 hours in Valtricor's history. I sat in my beat-up Honda Civic in the parking garage, laptop balanced on my knees, watching the Valtricor building fade into twilight. The security guard had walked me out at 5:58 p.m., 2 minutes early, like I might steal something in those final moments. If only he knew what I'd already taken with me, not equipment or data, but something far more valuable: knowledge. The laptop screen glowed in the dim light as I opened my personal documentation folder. While Evan and his CloudForge consultants would find plenty of documentation in the shared drives, they'd find it was like having a recipe written in Sanskrit. Sure, all the words were there, but without the context, without knowing why certain decisions were made, they might as well be reading poetry. I scrolled through my real documentation, the personal wiki I'd maintained for 16 years, every quirk, every workaround, every temporary fix that had become permanent. The DNS server that had to be restarted in a specific sequence or it would corrupt the zone files. The firewall rules written in an old syntax that the new GUI couldn't parse, but nobody dared touch because they worked. The certificate renewal process that ran through my personal admin account because the service account kept failing and I'd never had time to debug it properly. But the crown jewel of my invisible kingdom was the scheduler system. Back in 2009, before Valtricor had proper automation tools, I'd built a complex web of cron jobs that basically ran the company. Database backups, log rotation, cache clearing, report generation, security updates, dozens of critical tasks all orchestrated by scripts I'd written. Over the years, these had become so integrated into daily operations that people forgot they weren't part of the original software. The beautiful thing about cron jobs is they're like ghosts in the machine. They run silently, invisibly, doing their work without fanfare. And if you're the only one who knows they exist, who knows what user account they run under, who understands their dependencies and timing, well, then you're not just the janitor, you're the entire building's life support system. Tomorrow morning at 6 a.m., the biggest product launch in Valtricor's history would go live. Project Prometheus, they called it, a revolutionary SaaS platform that would supposedly transform how enterprises handled data analytics. $33 million in development, marketing, and partnership deals all culminating in a synchronized global release. The CEO would ring the opening bell at the New York Stock Exchange via satellite. Tech journalists worldwide had embargoed articles ready to publish. Early access users were poised to flood in. What they didn't know was that the entire launch process was automated through my scripts. The load balancers that would distribute traffic, the SSL certificates that would secure connections, the database replication that would keep things synchronized across regions, all of it ran through cron jobs executed under my personal admin account. An account that, according to the termination email I just received, would be deactivated at midnight. But here's where it got interesting. The scripts didn't just stop running when the account was deactivated. They'd fail, throw errors, try to write to log files they could no longer access, and in doing so, they'd corrupt the very processes they were meant to maintain. It was like pulling a single thread that would unravel the entire sweater. I pulled up the staging server login. My credentials still worked. Of course they did. The IT team was probably home by now, and who else would know to revoke access to systems that weren't supposed to exist? I could see all my scripts there, humming along, preparing for tomorrow's big show. Part of me felt a twinge of guilt. The engineers who'd worked on Prometheus didn't deserve this. The marketing team had poured their hearts into the campaign. But then I remembered Evan calling my life's work a legacy system. I remembered 16 years of being furniture. I remembered them giving me 2 hours to disappear. I closed the laptop and started the car. As I drove out of the garage, I caught a glimpse of the building in my rearview mirror. Lights blazed on the upper floors where the important people were probably still strategizing, still planning, still dreaming of their revolutionary launch. They had no idea their revolution was built on a foundation of shell scripts and cron jobs held together by one invisible woman's dedication. They'd never bothered to ask how the magic happened, only that it did. And tomorrow morning, when the magic failed to appear, they'd learn the difference between invisible and unnecessary. My phone buzzed. An automated email. Your Valtracore Technologies access has been terminated. Please return all company property within 5 business days. I smiled and tossed the phone onto the passenger seat. They could have my stress ball and coffee mug. They'd already given away everything else that mattered. The knowledge in my head, the passwords in my personal files, the understanding of how their digital circulatory system actually worked, all of that was mine. And in about 12 hours, they'd realize exactly how much they'd lost when they'd decided I was expendable. The radio played something upbeat as I drove home. I had dinner to make, a cat to feed, and a live stream to plan. Clara from IT was dead. Tomorrow, I'd just be Clara, cooking enthusiast and casual observer of what happens when you fire the person who holds all your invisible keys. Back in my apartment, I set the laptop on my kitchen counter and poured myself a glass of wine. Sauvignon Blanc, nothing fancy. I'd save the champagne for tomorrow morning. My cat, Schrodinger, wound around my ankles, oblivious to the fact that his owner was about to commit what some might call corporate sabotage. I preferred to think of it as returning company property to its natural state. The VPN connection established without issue. They hadn't revoked my access yet. Typical. IT security was always the last priority, especially when it came to legacy systems nobody understood. I navigated to the staging server, my fingers moving across the keyboard with 16 years of muscle memory. There they were, my scripts. Dozens of them, nested in directories I'd created back when Obama was still president. The file timestamps told their own story of late nights and emergency fixes. Here was the script I'd written during Hurricane Harvey, working from my flooded apartment to keep the servers running. There was the authentication module I'd coded while recovering from surgery, high on painkillers, but still more functional than the vendor solution they'd paid 6 figures for. I opened the main scheduler configuration. Tomorrow's launch sequence was a thing of beauty, if you appreciated that sort of thing. At 5:55 a.m., the pre-flight checks would begin, cache warming, database optimization, load balancer configuration. At 5:58, the CDN would start replicating content to edge servers worldwide. At 6 sharp, the floodgates would open. I didn't need to destroy anything. Destruction was amateur hour, the kind of thing they'd expect from a disgruntled employee. Besides, destruction left evidence, fingerprints, proof of malicious intent. No, I was far more elegant than that. 3 files, that's all I needed to touch. First, the data synchronization script. This beautiful piece of code kept the product catalog, user data, and analytics in perfect harmony across multiple databases. It ran every 30 minutes, unless certain flags were set. I added one line a conditional check for a log file that would no longer exist after my account was terminated. When the script couldn't find it, it would simply pause, not crash, not error out, just wait patiently for a file that would never come. The databases would slowly drift out of sync, like musicians playing from different sheets of music. Second, the SSL certificate auto-renewal. Valtracore certificates were due to refresh at 6:15 a.m. tomorrow. I'd set it that way to avoid peak traffic times. The renewal process required authentication through my admin account. When that failed, the system would fall back to the existing certificates, which would expire at 6:23 a.m. Every browser in the world would throw security warnings. Your connection is not private. The kiss of death for any product launch. Third, the log aggregation script. This one was my masterpiece. Every action, every error, every successful transaction was supposed to be logged for the post-launch analysis. Investors loved data. The board loved metrics. But the logging script ran with my credentials, writing to directories only I had permission to create. Without it, the launch would happen in the dark. No metrics, no analytics, no proof of success or failure, just silence. I made the changes carefully, commenting my code like always. Good habits die hard. Each modification was subtle, reasonable, the kind of thing that might happen naturally in any complex system. If anyone ever did trace it back, they'd find nothing malicious, just a series of dependencies on an account they'd terminated. Their own paperwork would damn them. As I worked, I thought about Evans CloudForge consultants. They'd probably charge $300 an hour to untangle this. More. Once they realized the documentation was useless without the tribal knowledge. They'd need weeks just to map the system, months to migrate it properly, all for the want of keeping one invisible woman on the payroll. I committed the changes at 6:43 p.m., logged out at 6:44. My access would be revoked in a few hours. But the beautiful thing about cron jobs is they're like dominoes. Once you've set them up, they fall on their own schedule. I closed the laptop and started prepping dinner. Chicken marsala tonight. I'd been saving the good mushrooms for a special occasion. As I cooked, I thought about tomorrow morning. Evan would probably arrive early, eager to watch his modernization strategy bear fruit. The CEO would be in New York, ready for his moment of glory. The marketing team would be poised at their keyboards, ready to flood social media with carefully crafted announcements. And at 6 a.m., right on schedule, nothing would happen, or rather, everything would happen exactly as programmed. The scripts would run, hit their dependencies, and stop. The certificates would expire. The logs would fail to write. And $33 million worth of preparation would grind to a halt, not with a bang, but with a whimper. I plated my dinner and sat down at my small dining table. Through my window, I could see the Valtricor building in the distance, still glowing with activity. Somewhere in there, people were making final preparations, running last-minute tests, dreaming of their successful launch. They had no idea they were about to learn the most expensive lesson in corporate history, the difference between something being invisible and something being gone. You only notice the air when you can't breathe it. You only value the foundation when the house starts to fall. I raised my wineglass to the distant lights. To legacy systems, I said to Schrödinger, who blinked at me from his perch. And to the people who maintain them. Tomorrow would be interesting. Tonight, I had chicken to enjoy and a cooking live stream to plan. After all, I'd need an alibi for 6 a.m. I woke at 5:30 a.m., not from an alarm but from habit. 16 years of being on call had trained my body to anticipate disasters before dawn. I made coffee, fed Schrödinger, and set up my phone for the TikTok live stream. Early morning eggs Benedict with Clara. Perfectly timed, thoroughly documented, completely alibi-proof. At 5:55 a.m., I cracked the first egg. Somewhere across town, my scripts were waking up too, beginning their final performance. The pre-flight checks would be running now, or trying to. I whisked hollandaise and thought about the junior engineers probably monitoring the launch, coffee in hand, blissfully unaware that their instruments were about to go dark. 6 a.m. arrived with the soft chime of my kitchen timer. Perfect poached eggs. Also, if my calculations were correct, the first domino had just fallen. The main product page would be loading for early access users in Tokyo, London, Sydney, or rather, it would be trying to load. My phone buzzed, not Valtricor. They didn't have my personal number, just a comment on my live stream. Those eggs look perfect. What's your secret? Patience, I replied, smiling at the camera, and knowing exactly when to stop stirring. By 6:15 a.m., as I plated my breakfast, the SSL certificates would be failing their renewal. The secure connections that customers expected, that Google required for search rankings, that investors assumed were automatic, all of them hanging by a thread that was about to snap. I ate slowly, savoring each bite while mentally tracking the cascade of failures. 6:23 a.m., certificates expired. Every browser would start throwing warnings. The marketing team's carefully crafted social media posts would be directing millions of users to a site that looked like a phishing scam. My neighbor knocked at 6:30 a.m., Mrs. Patterson, returning my casserole dish. We chatted about her grandson while behind us, visible through my kitchen window. The Valtricor building stood silent against the morning sky. I wondered if Evan had arrived yet, if he was staring at his cloud-forged dashboard, trying to understand why everything looked fine except nothing was working. By 7 a.m., the real panic would be setting in. The development team would be discovering that the databases weren't syncing. California users would see different product information than New York users. Shopping carts would calculate different prices. The beautiful, unified platform would be fracturing into digital fiefdoms, each server an island unto itself. The worst part, for them, would be the silence. No error logs, no crash reports, No data trails to follow. The system wasn't broken. It was simply refusing to report, like a patient in a coma with no monitors attached, alive but unreachable. I finished my live stream at 7:30 a.m., thanked my viewers, and switched to my laptop. Not to check on Valtricor, that bridge was burned. Instead, I opened LinkedIn. 3 messages already from recruiters. Word travels fast in Austin tech circles. By 8 a.m., I knew the war room would be in full session. Every senior engineer, every architect, every consultant they could reach would be huddled around screens full of green lights that meant nothing. The monitoring systems showed healthy servers, normal CPU usage, plenty of bandwidth, but the customer complaints would be pouring in. The investor calls would be starting. The tech journalists would be asking why they couldn't access the platform they were supposed to be reviewing. I imagined Evan, his Stanford MBA useless against the reality of legacy code. He'd be demanding answers from his team, not understanding that the answers were sitting in a 2-bedroom apartment across town, sipping coffee and updating her resume. The CEO would still be in New York, standing in front of the stock exchange, preparing for a triumphant bell ringing that would instead become a very public humiliation. The Japanese partners would be politely inquiring about the technical difficulties. The European distributors would be less polite. 9 a.m. brought the first news alert on my phone. Valtricor Technologies experiences major outage during product launch. I didn't click through. I'd lived that story. By now, someone clever might be piecing it together. The terminated employee, the system dependencies, the timing. But knowing what happened and fixing it were 2 very different things. Every script that failed had triggered other failures. Every dead authentication had locked another door. They weren't dealing with a problem anymore. They were dealing with a problem ecosystem, each issue feeding and protecting the others. The beautiful irony was that everything could be fixed with a few commands, if you knew which commands, in which order, with which permissions. But that knowledge had walked out the door at 5:58 p.m. yesterday, carrying a cardboard box and 16 years of unappreciated expertise. I opened another recruiter message. This one was interesting. A startup doing infrastructure automation, looking for someone who understood legacy system integration. I smiled at the term. Legacy systems, also known as the things that actually worked, built by people who actually cared, maintained by ghosts who were only visible when they stopped haunting. My phone rang. Unknown number, Austin area code. I let it go to voicemail, then another, then another. I turned the phone off and went back to my coffee. Clara from IT was gone. They'd made that very clear. And ghosts, as everyone knows, don't answer phones. The morning sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across my apartment. Somewhere, $33 million was burning in digital silence. Somewhere, executives were learning that invisible didn't mean unnecessary. And somewhere, CloudForge Solutions was about to submit a very, very expensive proposal. By 10 a.m., the tech blogs had picked up the story. Valtricor's 33 Prometheus launch. Engulfed in digital flames. Clever headline. I scrolled through the speculation while Schrödinger napped in a sunbeam. Anonymous sources inside the company were blaming everything from cyber attacks to solar flares. Nobody mentioned the simpler explanation they'd fired the person who kept the lights on. My former coworker Derek texted me around 10:30 a.m., one of the few who'd actually known my name. Clara, the place is melting down. Evan's been screaming at CloudForge for 2 hours. They can't even understand our server architecture. Did you know the entire authentication system runs through personal admin accounts? I didn't respond, but I smiled. The CloudForge consultants would be discovering what I'd always known. Valtricor's infrastructure wasn't built. It was grown, like coral reef. Each system had evolved to work with its neighbors in ways that made sense at the time, but defied conventional documentation. You couldn't just rip out one part and replace it with something modern, pull too hard, and the whole reef crumbled. By 11 a.m., the war room had apparently expanded to include the entire C-suite. According to Derek's increasingly frantic texts, they'd commandeered the main conference room, the one with the fancy video wall that I'd configured 3 years ago, the wall that, coincidentally, required my credentials to display external data feeds. The junior engineers were pulling apart every line of code, trying to trace the dependencies, but it was like following a river back to its source through 1,000 tributaries. Each script called other scripts. Each process triggered other processes, all of it flowing through authentication gates that no longer recognized their keeper. At 11:45 a.m., the CEO cut short his New York trip. The bell-ringing ceremony had been quietly canceled. The press release about unexpected technical challenges was probably being drafted by lawyers who charged more per hour than I'd made in a week. Noon brought an unexpected visitor, Jennifer from HR. I'd finally bothered to check her email signature in the termination paperwork. She stood at my apartment door looking like she'd aged 5 years overnight. "Clara, we need to talk." "I don't work for Valtricor anymore," I said, not opening the door wider than the chain allowed. "You made that very clear yesterday. This is an emergency. The entire product launch is not my problem." She tried a different approach. "We're prepared to offer you a consulting arrangement, short term, just to help with the transition." I almost laughed. Yesterday I wasn't worth a proper goodbye. Today they wanted to rent back the knowledge they'd thrown away. "My consulting rate is $1,500 an hour," I said. 4-hour minimum, paid in advance. Her face went through several expressions before settling on desperation. I'll need to get approval." "You do that?" I closed the door and went back to my laptop. 3 more recruiter messages. One from a company I'd actually heard of, doing interesting work with infrastructure automation. I started drafting a response. By 2 p.m., the news had gone national. CNBC was running a segment on the dangers of digital transformation. Valtricor's stock price had dropped 12%. Somewhere, investors were calculating exactly how many millions were evaporating per hour. Derek's texts had evolved into a play-by-play of corporate disaster. The database team had discovered the synchronization failure, but couldn't fix it without the logging system. The security team had identified the certificate issue, but couldn't renew them without proper authentication. The network team had found my scripts, but couldn't understand them without documentation that existed only in my head. It was like watching dominoes fall in slow motion. If dominoes could panic and blame each other. At 3 p.m., my phone rang again. This time I recognized the number. Bradley Morrison. The CEO himself. I let it ring. He called back immediately. Then again, on the 4th call, I answered. "Clara." His voice had lost its usual polish. "We need you back, whatever it takes." "I don't work for you anymore, Bradley." First time I'd ever used his first name. It felt good. "This is destroying us. The investors are threatening to pull out. The partner contracts have penalty clauses. You need the invisible architect you decided was a legacy system." Silence, then quieter. "We made a mistake." "No," I corrected. "You made a choice. Choices have consequences." "What do you want your job back? A raise, a promotion?" What did I want yesterday? I might have said respect, recognition, a seat at the table where decisions were made, but sitting in my sunny apartment, watching a $40 billion company scramble to understand infrastructure they'd taken for granted, I realized I wanted something else entirely. "I want you to learn," I said. "I want every executive who's ever called it a cost center to understand what happens when you treat essential people as expendable. I want every manager who's ever ignored the warnings about technical debt to see that bill come due. And I want every company that thinks they can modernize by firing the people who built their success to watch their digital house burn down." Clara. "My consulting rate is $1,500 an hour. When you're ready to pay it, Jennifer has my email. Until then, I have a life to rebuild. You should probably focus on rebuilding your company." I hung up. Outside my window, the Valtricor building stood unchanged, its glass facade reflecting the afternoon sun. But inside, I knew. The careful order I'd maintained for 16 years was dissolving into chaos. They'd figure it out eventually, throw enough money and consultants at the problem, and they'd slowly reconstruct what I'd built. It would take months, maybe years. It would cost millions. And it would never work quite as well as the invisible system maintained by the invisible woman they'd decided they didn't need. But that wasn't my problem anymore. I had interviews to schedule, a career to resurrect, and a very patient cat to feed. The ghost of Clara from AT could finally rest in peace. At 4:30 p.m., I opened my laptop and composed an email, not to Bradley or Evan or even Jennifer from HR.